Hi, everyone. We're now live. It's my great privilege to introduce Chris Klimas and Stuart Moulthrop. Chris Klimas created Twine, an open source tool for interactive text-based storytelling in 2009. And he continues to lead the project. He's also the author of several interactive fiction works, including the award-winning Blue Chairs, and is a principal at Unmapped Path. Stuart Moulthrop is a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where he coordinates the concentration in media, cinema, and digital studies, and serves as co-director of the Digital Cultures Collaboratory in the Center for 21st Century Studies. That's a lot of C's there. He is author of several notable works of electronic literature, including Victory Garden, Under Language, and End of the White Subway. He has collaborated with Danae Ginger Traversals, sorry about that name, concerning the preservation of early, Didi, okay, yeah, concerning early electronic literature, I should have asked you, and Anastasia Salter on Twining, an upcoming book on Twine, and a critical and practical study of the Twine platform. It's a great privilege to introduce these two people, so I'm going to hand it over to them, and you won't see me anymore.
Trying to think if there's anything else, any other...
There is actually, Chris. Yeah. So we're going to propose some projects you might want to take away and build in that hour. And Chris, I meant to ask you, totally forgot, are we going to propose conventions for people sharing work they might do?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to do would be, easy for me to say at least, would be itch.io is really great at hosting Twine games. It takes a little bit of setup if you've ever set up an account there, but it's not too much. And that probably will be the easiest way to share your work, because then you'll just have a link you can quickly post into the Discord channel, and folks will be able to play your game. That would be at least my first guess about the best way to go about doing it. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, we'll maybe think of some other. We'll see how things go, and maybe we'll have some other ideas. I will make a note to you, Chris, that you maybe need to speak up a little bit.
Okay, I will speak up a little bit more. How's that?
Right. Yeah.
Cool. So we built in the extra time at the end for you to try things out on your own. So don't panic if it seems like you need a little bit more time to go back to something. Cool. So let's talk about what Chapbook is, because that's what this whole session is about. Chapbook is a story format for Twine. And story formats are probably one of the most difficult things to explain about what Twine is, because they're a little bit abstract. They are basically like an engine or a runtime for stories, so that when you're editing in Twine, obviously that's the Twine app itself, but when you hit the test button or the play button in Twine, or you email your friend your story, or you publish it somewhere else like Itch, that's where a story format takes over. And each one is kind of like a mini programming language in a lot of ways. It's how, if you want to build extra interactivity into your stories, you need to check out the documentation for your story format. And they all have different capabilities, different points of view, all kinds of stuff like that. And so the three major ones that were around before Chapbook, which is about a year old now, before Chapbook existed, are Harlowe, SugarCube, and Snowman. And if you've used Twine before, you probably are familiar with one of those. And if you have never heard of a story format before, but you've built with Twine, you've probably been using Harlowe, because that's the default one. So anyways, so we had three of these things already, along with many others, actually, that like smaller ones that people have built for specific purposes. And so a question people ask me all the time, not necessarily all the time, but when Chapbook comes up, people ask, why do we need a fourth one, right? Like, we have three of these things already. That's hard enough as it is. And so to me, at least, the answer is that Chapbook is a chance to kind of take a step back and look at how people are using Twine, or have been using Twine. What do they want to do with it? What kind of interactions do they want to build with it? Where do they run into trouble? What are the things that are difficult with it? And try to address that in some way. And also, third, the other thing I wanted to do with Chapbook was build something that was mobile friendly from the ground up. And I mean, there's two kind of aspects to that. The first is that it's responsive, and what that means is that no matter what device you're playing a Chapbook story on, it'll kind of fit and resize to match that. So you don't have to do, I'm sure you've been on websites on a phone where you have to like scroll horizontally, and that's super annoying, of course. And not only is it responsive and it adjusts to device sizes and so forth, but it is also very small in size. The Chapbook engine by itself takes less than a second to download on a 3G cell network, which is pretty slow nowadays compared to other kinds of networks. Chapbook comes with Twine, or recent versions of Twine, but if you haven't upgraded recently, then I'm going to show in a second how you can add that directly to Twine. And in fact, even if you do have a recent version of Twine, I recommend upgrading, because there is a recent upgrade I did, or update I did to Chapbook that fixed some bugs, and that hasn't been rolled out yet with a recent Twine release. And so I recommend manually updating. That's the first thing, in fact, I'm going to show how to do. And yeah, so I think I will jump into sharing my screen. And while I get that set up, the guiding purpose, or the guiding kind of thought I had with what I wanted to show today was last year at NarraScope in Boston, Stuart and I did a demo, or did a similar sort of seminar about Chapbook, only we came at it from a beginner or even point of view, or even somebody who's never used Twine before. Today, what we want to do is look at it from the point of view of someone who has used Twine before, might even have a lot of experience programming or creating stuff with Twine, and might have been like, well, I'm curious about Chapbook, but I've never really had a chance to look at it in detail. And what about it might appeal to those folks? That's the way I'm kind of looking at it. So what I've done is I put together a tiny page of all the resources that we're going to use inside this seminar. I have the link kind of labeled down here at the bottom right, but hopefully I think Dan is going to do us a favor and paste that into chat too, so that people are able to follow along. So I'll start off by just showing this top part, which is that if I need to add Chapbook to Twine, all I need to do is select that text at the top, hit copy, just go into Twine, go over to formats here, and then hit add format, and then paste it in. And I think when I hit add, it's going to complain at me and say, yes, you actually already have that. But if you don't, it will add it to you here, and then you just need to make sure to select it here under story formats. So beyond that, I'm going to walk through 4 high-level topics. One is how to build in images into the Chapbook story, how to add audio to it, how to test your stories in Chapbook, because I personally feel like at least I spend as much time testing my stories as I do writing them. And finally, how to customize the appearance of a Chapbook story. These are all things that I've heard people ask questions about a lot. So to jump right in, let's create a new story, or I'll create one here. I'll say seminar demo. Okay. And so let's say I want to add an image, and say we'll start with some basic text.
A dark and story night. Yeah.
And so if I pop into test mode here, let's say I want to add an image here. And I'll start with the absolute easiest way to do it, and that's to use someone else's imagery. And in fact, I'm going to use a website called Unsplash. If you haven't seen it before, Unsplash is a collection of, as it says, freely usable images. It's licensed so that you don't have to worry about paying royalties or anything like that for these images. In fact, they're so nice that they will let people use their images right off of the website, so you don't have to host them yourselves. So let's say I want to add an image of a city at night. And we'll scroll down a little bit. I like this one, we'll just say. So if I want to include this into my story, all I need to do is click this share button here. And I can either click the this icon that does the copying for me, or I can just select the text and hit copy. And then I'm going to pop back into Twine and type embed Unsplash image and paste in that code that I got. And now if I hit test, there's my image. I can do that as much as I want to. So I can use as many images from Unsplash as I want to, of course. And so this is a really, really fast way to start adding images. You can see I didn't have to do really much of anything to get this set up. A quick word about what I just typed in. Anytime you see these curly braces inside of a Chapbook story, it's called an insert. Inserts in Chapbook cause stuff to appear on screen that isn't just plain text. And so mainly it's things like images, form inputs, stuff like that, variables. And so I'll use it in a second to embed a sound effect, but by and large, it's how you get other kinds of content into a Chapbook story. Quick note, also, I can use not only Unsplash, I can also use Flickr, because Flickr allows for embedding images in a similar kind of way. Flickr, obviously not the most popular image hosting source right now, as far as I know, but it does have a lot of Creative Commons licensed content in it. And so it can be a surprisingly good resource for images if you're looking to use someone else's or draw on sort of this sort of stock art kind of stuff. So you can get pretty far by using Unsplash, Flickr, or what have you, but I bet a bunch of you in the audience are like, well, that's nice, but I'd like to use my own image. And so I need to do a little bit of trickery to get that set up. And a lot of it is tied up with how Twine works, unfortunately. So what I have sort of ahead of time is I have this folder, and I have an image that I definitely did not take this photo. This also came from Unsplash. But let's say I want to use that. I don't want to actually embed it directly from Unsplash, or maybe it's something I drew myself or whatever. So to get this started, or to use this, I'm going to do kind of a trick. And this is something that I learned actually from the Twine community itself. Kind of, it's like one of those funny things that I was like, oh yeah, this will totally work, or it should. So what I'm going to do is go to the View menu and hit Show Story Library, and it's going to open, here's my stories. Now, in order for this next step to work, I got to quit out of Twine, because Twine gets a little picky. It doesn't want me messing around with files in here, but it's okay if I go behind its back a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to copy not only that image, but also these MP3 files that I'm going to get to in a second. I'm just going to copy them in here. Now, once I get back Twine, and then go back into my story, what I can now do is just take out that word Unsplash, and I can just type volcano.jpg. And the other sort of trick part of this is that I, unfortunately, once I start doing this approach, I can't use the test play buttons anymore. If I do that, it's going to show a broken image. What I can do instead is I can open this image directly, or the file directly. And now it works. And so as I'm working in Twine, if I modify stuff, what I'm going to say, I can say, this is the worst story of all time, right? So if I as I edit in here, I have to, this is a little bit of a downside, is I need to hit reload here to see it. And depending on what's going on, I might also need to click restart down at the bottom. We'll see that in a second. So it takes a few more steps to embed your own images inside a Chapbook, but in general, it's not too much of a hassle, I hope. And
Chris, I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm going to dive into your stream here, but
yeah.
So, those of us who are used to working with the web, well, at least some of us, tend to store the images in a separate directory.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there a way to organize images in a directory? I haven't had success with that, but maybe I just don't know how to do it.
Yeah, you can. Okay. So you would so it takes a little bit of extra technical know-how to do that. What I would do is, let's say, oh yeah, it's going to complain at me because Twine is open. But what I would do is create a folder inside of here, inside my stories library here, and then whatever that folder is named, like let's say I called it images, I just type images in a / and that should work.
Okay. I promise I'll shut up after this one. But
no.
So when the file goes live to the web,
mm-hmm.
right? When we've published to an HTML file, then okay. So having a subdirectory will still work then, you're saying?
Yes, as long as you keep it packaged together. And that's a
right,
key
okay.
thing, is that, so if I were to, for example, if I hit publish file here, and then I'll publish it to my desktop, we'll just say, when I open this will no longer work. What I need to do is then keep that volcano file alongside of it. And when I do that, hopefully it should work, but maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. Okay. It should get oh, it's because I added this part here to show you what I was talking. Actually, I'll do it the full way. And this is great because, by the way, for folks watching, I did not rehearse any of this, so we'll see if it works. If it doesn't work, you get your money back. Okay. Ta-da. Okay. So just to recap a little bit, because I went a little bit fast. What I did was, again, and the hardest part of this particular trick is that you need to make sure that the file names match up exactly, including like uppercase and lowercase. And so like I need it to be lowercase I images, for example, and I need it to be exactly volcano.jpg. And the other trick that folks can, or the other issue that you can run into sometimes with this is that oftentimes, I actually don't know whether Windows or still does this, but Windows oftentimes will hide file extensions from you by default. And so like when you look at the file, it may not show this .jpg part here. And so if you do that, if you run into issues like that, make sure to, like there in Windows, there's a particular setting, and also on Macs, there's similar things where you need to show file extensions. And so that can be a thing that can kind of catch you by or cause you trouble. Cool. Any other questions, Stuart, before I move on? Okay.
No, I promise I won't. You know, you could have rehearsed this, and then I could mess it all up. So no, I'll shut up.
I'll come up with some fun questions for you. All right, so let's talk about audio. So what I did, unfortunately, there's not really an option like I was demoing like with Unsplash for audio. Obviously, there are services like Unsplash or SoundCloud and stuff like that. I've, at least so far, had difficulty adding SoundCloud or things like that to Chapbook, but it might come in a future release, I hope, because I want to make it as easy as possible. What I did instead was, you probably saw when I was copying, I've got these two MP3 files. I've got, and hopefully, oh shoot, I hope that you can hear this sound. If not, I can sort of narrate. I have a seatbelt noise and also some background audio of like night wildlife. And so Chapbook has functionality for both these things. So I'll jump in and start adding stuff or adding the code to that. And what I'm gonna do is add them in a separate passage. Okay, and so this takes a little bit of typing. And so while I type this stuff out, I'll talk about sound formats, a super exciting topic, but important to know about. So I have these as MP3 files, and I think that's my general recommendation about using audio with Chapbook and in general on the web. The reason why is that browser support, because pretty much MP3 can be played on almost every browser out there. The close second is a format called OGG Vorbis, which is originally was more open source in terms of license. OGG, or you might see it like the files have a .ogg extension on them. They can be played on almost every browser except Safari on iOS and a Mac, whereas MP3s can be pretty much played on everything. So personally, I use MP3s for everything. As far as I know, all the licensing issues that were involved with MP3, the format MP3 have gone away by now and expired. So I don't think there's any issue with using MP3. OGG is still an option, and that's sort of driven by browser support more than anything else. I have a link in the talk notes that talks through formats and so forth. So if you're curious about that stuff, feel free to kind of click through and read more. What I just typed out here is another kind of sort of feature of Chapbook. And this section up here above the two dashes is what's called a variables block. And so it's kind of a complicated example to start with. But so for example, if I wanted to set a variable called number of rings, right? All I need to do that is to type it up here. And so if you're coming to Chapbook from another format, this might be a little bit weird. Because I think a lot of people are used to setting variables like inside of the text of their passage. The reason why I decided to kind of pull out variables is that I feel at least that it makes your passages a lot easier to follow. You can see it makes it a lot easier, in my opinion, to sort of follow how things change as you play the story. The other question that people sometimes ask is, well, wait a minute, like I need to add an if statement to set my variable. Like how can I do that up here? I'm not going to go into super details, but there is a way to do this in Chapbook.
You just have to get used to it.
Yes, it's basically it's parenthetical here, but I just want to note that it exists because that can raise flags for folks if you're not familiar with it or you're coming from a different format. Anyways, what I'm using here is I'm configuring these predefined variables called, in this case, it's sound.effect. In this case, I'm defining one called seatbelt, and I'm giving it a URL and also a description. A description is used for in cases where folks are unable to perceive the sound, like they have difficulty hearing and they've set up accessibility in their web browser. Instead, they'll hear this description. The URL is required here because, of course, we need to know where your sound file is. But not only, like, you might wonder, like, well, why can't I just kind of type in the URL here or something like that? The reason why is that sound files can get kind of big, especially the ambient sounds like music and things like that. And so when you set up this variable, Chapbook will actually start preloading it. Because imagine, like, obviously, if you have a passage where like a dramatic sound effect is going to play as soon as you get to it, you want that sound effect to fire pretty much immediately. You don't want it to sit there and think, okay, okay, now I'm going to play, right? You want it to be pretty much linked to that click. And so when you define it up front here, it will start preloading it for you so that it's ready. And so here, just like I need to make the file name match here and show you what I'm looking at here. Again, seat dash belt, easy thing to kind of mess up. And also I need to make this variable, this part of the variable name match up to this value here. Again, this is an insert, so I'm just gonna, this basically will effectively, will hopefully play that sound effect for me. So let's open Story. Hopefully you heard the beep sound. One other big caveat with audio is that I didn't just create the second passage just to keep things a little bit easier to follow. It's actually kind of necessary, and it's all kind of tied up with autoplay media in web browsers. Most people, like, I hate it when, like, if you go to a web page or something like that, and it immediately starts playing this really loud, obnoxious noise, right? Like, nobody likes that. And so browsers have put a ton of protections in to prevent that sort of thing. And so there are a lot of little, like, details to this, how this works. I also added a link onto the talk notes about this aspect. But the short version is, in almost all cases, as long as you've gotten the user to click or otherwise interact with your story, sound will play. And the particularly vexing part is that if your sound is blocked due to autoplay restrictions, you won't notice anything. For example, like if I hit reload now, it's not playing any sound for me. It just silently blocks the sound. And so this is going to be a thing that kind of messes you up when you're first working with sound, that you're like, well, there's no error message or anything like that. Although I believe if you look under the developer tools, it will complain at me and say, nope, sorry, I can't because you didn't interact with it. And so the golden rule on all this stuff is that as long as the user or the player has clicked through at least one passage link, you should be good to go on audio. And so I'll just round it out by talking about ambient sound. So it works almost the same exact way. The only difference between ambient sound and sound effects is that ambient sound loops. It keeps playing for as long as you have that sort of set inside your story. So it's a good way to build in, like, background music or a sound bed like I have here. And it works almost the same exact way. Again, need to make sure, let's double check. It's called night.mp3. I need to make that line up, give it a description just like my sound effect. And then my insert looks a little bit different. I just write ambient sound. And so let's pop back in and, oops, I lost that file. And restart. And now I can hear, hopefully you at home are hearing both a beep and really, really loud night wildlife. And so the only other things to keep in mind with ambient sound is, like I said, that it keeps looping over and over again. The only way to stop it is if I set up a second set of ambient sound, I would just use that name instead in a later passage. Or if I just want silence, all I just would do is write no ambient sound, and that would stop. So that's sound. The next piece I'm going to talk about is the debugger built into Chapbook. And to kind of demo that, what I'm going to use is this Cloak of Darkness story. It's sort of the sample story I used to demo Chapbook stuff. It's linked also on the talk notes, but also off of the main Chapbook page if you want to play around with it. And I wanted to use that just so I could show like an example of a story with a couple different passages, and so we had something to work with. Whenever I hit test in Twine, I'm going to get this sort of sidebar on the right here. What happens is I'm going to actually do things a little bit out of order. I'm going to start here on this history tab. And so you can see as I kind of click through my story, it tracks not only what passages I've clicked on and traveled to, but I can see exactly how variables have changed. And so if you're trying to track down, like, well, wait a minute, why did I ended up in this weird state where my game is broken? Like, how did that happen? You can kind of scroll through here and see what happens. I can also click this little return button here and jump back to a particular point in time. So that can be handy, kind of keep track of stuff. The second tab, or this tab next to it called State, works in a similar sort of way. The only difference is that it doesn't show the history of variables. It just shows what the current state of things is. And so, for example, I have this variable called room. And what that does is it says, well, where am I right now? And in fact, that variable gets displayed up here. And so not only can I see what my variables look like, I can also change them. And when I do that, my story is going to change immediately. And so this can be like if you're trying to test the logic of a particular branch, for example. This is a really great way to do that on the fly and double check that you have things in the state that you want. Below that is this thing labeled snapshots. And what that's about is that I can choose to, it's almost like save games built into Chapbook, except for testing, right? Like, let's say that I want to, let's say I'm building a really long story. And I want to skip to the middle point of my story, or like the second half, or I just want to go to the endings and play around with those or something like that. A lot of the time, what I've seen at least is that people will build sort of like shortcut passages in Twine that will like set up variables and let you skip ahead and stuff like that. This saves you hopefully the trouble of getting those set up. All I need to do is hit add snapshot. I'm going to say, give it a name. It doesn't really matter what. And now once I restart, if I click NarraScope, it's going to jump me immediately there. And obviously you can have as many snapshots as you want. And they kind of stick around as you test. It's not like if you log out, come back to Twine later, those will be there available to you. Final debugger thing I want to point out is this Notes tab. And it is sort of a mini version of other story formats like Illum that let you do, that are oriented around proofreading. And so these notes that I can write to myself also stick around as I test and stuff like that. So I can leave notes like, oh, I need to fix this one mistake with it, or I need to work on the characterization in this particular part, or whatever. And so these notes, as I click around, they're going to change. And so I can use them for my own reference, but I can also share those same notes. So if someone gave me, if someone sent me their own Twine story, I could open it up in here, write my own notes, and then when I hit export, it's going to give me an HTML file. That other person can either just open it and read the notes that I've left for them, or there's also this import button here next to it that will kind of pull in those notes and replace what I've already typed. And so that, depending on which way you want to look at it, that can be useful. Tiny note, people always ask this about Chapbook in the testing stuff. They're like, oh, well, these testing tools must suck up a lot of like space or use a lot of download time. If you're concerned about it, it turns out it only is about 20K, I think, of download. But if that's something that you're still concerned about, there's a separate version of Chapbook that you can use when you're ready to publish your stories for real that cuts out that extra 20K. Even if you don't use that version, when you do publish, this whole testing stuff goes away. Regular players won't see it. I'm going to skip over the Style tab because I want to talk about sort of appearance in a more general sense. And this is another one where I kind of took a little bit of a shortcut just to get things set up. And so what I did was I set up this sample story. It's not even really a story, more just like placeholder text. But because it took a little bit more typing to get things set up, And you see what I did here was just change some basic aspects of Chapbook's appearance. And so the reason and sort of the underlying thought that I have with Chapbook is that oftentimes when people ask like, well, I want to change how my Twine story looks, a lot of the times the answer is, well, go learn CSS. And I like CSS a lot. Like I write it almost every day myself. But it's not necessarily something you're going to learn in a day. And so the goal here that I have with Chapbook is that you are able to, folks who don't know any CSS, at least are able to make some basic changes to it. And so let me show you what that looks like. Just like before, when I was changing or setting up sound effects, I changed the appearance of Chapbook through setting variables. And there's a whole slew of them. It's actually kind of encyclopedic having to list out all of them. So that's another thing I added in the talk, the notes for the talk, is the section in the Chapbook documentation that talks about like, what are all the different settings here? But really briefly, this, like for example, config.style.backdrop, that sets like the area around the page itself, right? Not always visible. So like on a phone, for example, you don't get the backdrop because it needs all the space it can for text. There's stuff like I can configure the color of the page. So this like green 1 on black is what's setting the color here. And you might be wondering like, what the heck is green 1? Chapbook comes with a color palette called Open Color. I borrowed it from other people because I thought it was good. It's obviously open source, so I didn't like steal it. And it comes with, because at least my own experience as someone who's not a particularly visually artist kind of centered kind of person, is that I found like picking colors is hard, and picking colors that go well with each other can be tricky, or trickier than you might imagine. Open Color, it comes with Chapbook. It gives you some basic color choices. It gives you different shades of green, for example, shades of red and so forth. There's a link in the talk notes that even there's a particular page under the guide that shows you like swatches of these colors so you can see what I'm talking about. And so if you're just starting out, this could be an easy kind of quick way to do it, because like I can tweak, I can change, well, I don't really like green 1, not in love with it for whatever reason. Green 2 is slightly brighter and so forth. It goes all the way up to green 9, I think. Anyways, but if you are more experienced and you already know how colors are specified in CSS, you can just type whatever you want. So like, let's say you disagree with me completely and you think, no, like green is so outdated when it comes to sci-fi. I want it to be bright red instead. And so that I can type in whatever kind of colors that a web browser understands. Like I could type in an HSL color, RGB, whatever. Anyways, I'll put it back to green 1 because I do think actually that looks better personally, but there we are. This page style thing you might have noticed is that by default, there's kind of a drop shadow around the page. You can either take it away like I did, or you can just do a simple line border. There's different values for that. Here in the second block, I kind of followed the same pattern as above to talk about, and this time I'm styling what links look like. And so that affects not only what links look like, but also when I either hover over them or when I'm using a mobile device when I tap on them. And finally, this third section here is configuring the header and footer of Chapbook. And let me see if I think I have another tab here open. Yeah, so for example, this up here is the header, and by default, it shows you the name of your story. Or actually, this one is blank by default, sorry. The name of the story appears here at the bottom left. And then at the bottom right is a restart link. So if you don't want that, like maybe you want to show some other status, or you just don't like how this is set up, or you want to take it away entirely, you can. And this is all just code that, or text that you could enter, just, like this is another insert, just like the sound effect or the image inserts that I was showing a minute ago. So the final thing before I hand it off to Stuart is I want to fix one thing about this particular story. And like, that's like, you probably don't know this about me. Besides Twine, I'm also obsessed with fonts. This font does not fit, in my opinion, with my weird placeholder text. We need something that's more sci-fi. And so the go-to kind of resource for using fonts on the web is usually Google Fonts. There are other choices with Facebook, or not Facebook, oh dear, Chapbook. But Google Fonts, I think, is probably the most popular. I cheated a little bit, and ahead of time, I searched for a font that I thought looked a little bit more sci-fi, but it was also readable. Unfortunately, if you type in sci-fi on Google Fonts, there are none, which is just a shame. But anyways, let's grab this one. And if basically all I'm going to do is use this regular font style for now. This is all standard stuff if you've ever used Google Fonts before. It works, you know, you can see like the rough outline is the same as like using an image from Unsplash. I have to click through a couple things. The key thing I'm looking for here is this link thing. And so what I need to do is select that. And then what I'm going to do is go into the back into my passage and write config style Google font. Really important, easy thing to miss is that when you're using this, make sure to include these single quotes around the code. If you leave them out, Chapbook will get confused because it's not really sure what to make of what that is otherwise. This by itself doesn't change like the actual font used on the page. You can obviously go to town as far as like you can change links to use a different font, the header, the footer, or whatever. But just for today, just to keep it simple, I'm just going to change the entire page font to be Tillium Web. And when I do that, ta-da, and that's all it takes to use a Google font inside of Chapbook. It also has support for Adobe Typekit. That is, I think you need a Creative Cloud subscription to use it, but it's another popular one. And if you want to use like a font file that you just happen to have, you got from some other website or whatever, or you downloaded directly from Google Fonts, you can use it also in the same sort of way. You just have to do you type in different values, use different variables, but that's all, like it's the same process basically kind of works.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there some sort of default path if, you know, something should happen for some reason and, you know, you choose an odd font, it's not available? Is there a default?
Yes, and thank you for reminding me, because actually I forgot to talk about font stacks. That's what's going on. I forgot to talk about what this value is here. So this stuff with the slashes is basically defining what's called a font stack. And like Stuart was saying, imagine a world where Google Fonts is down. It's horrifying to imagine, I'm sure, but it could happen, right, one day? Or maybe Google Fonts is just super slow, or maybe the person playing your game, maybe you gave them the game directly and they don't have an internet connection going on right now. What this is defining are sort of fallbacks. And so, for example, like I could say, like, well, if Titilium here isn't available, well, try Helvetica next. And maybe the player doesn't have Helvetica for some reason, so we'll have them use Arial. This sans-serif part at the end here sort of is an instruction to web browsers to say, like, look, I don't know, pick your best sans-serif font. I don't know anymore. So it's kind of the fallback plan. And so usually I can't think of a scenario where you wouldn't want to specify a generic font. Like, for example, if I was using a serif font, you know, the generic version is just plain old serif, right? And so that is always kind of a good practice. Cool. So Stuart, I will hand it off to you for the next part.
I shall unmute myself because that would be useful. Okay, and share my screen. So I actually don't know how long this is going to run because I didn't really run it through. But I want to talk a little bit about, so my focus is going to be how Chapbook extends and expands, where you can take it beyond, you know, the sort of beginner node and link stories and choices level, which, you know, no disrespect for that. I love that level where I started. But, you know, what I really, really am coming to adore about Chapbook is that it is so seamlessly and smoothly expandable. So let me start with one particular case. So and actually, this instance is going to run in Harlowe, not in Chapbook, which is one of the elder formats, the elder gods. So there's a feature in Harlowe that I really, really care for, and I'll show you. So it's the either macro, right? And I don't know whether, I actually can't see any of you. The audience is invisible at the moment. So I'm just going to make this rash assumption that you know what I mean when I talk about Harlowe, which is another story format, a sort of more code-intensive story format, and one that is maybe a little bit more liberal with the way it treats screen behavior than Chapbook at least seems to be at first. So there's this thing called a macro, and it's a way of modifying the way text is and behaves on the screen, and either allows you to designate a piece of a sentence as, essentially variable. So if you watch the last word or phrase in the first sentence here, where it says the either macro in Harlowe is, and then as I reload the passage, looking in the right place, I'm
Stuart,
getting,
can I interrupt for a second? I think
sure.
you may need to reshare because I think like, when you open the passage, like I didn't see it. So you might need to choose to share your entire screen if you can swing that.
Okay,
Narrate.
stop share. Yeah, well, that was awkward. Okay, glad you saw that though.
I think that's true.
What
I'll
am I
let you know if
trying
it
to
changes.
share here? I was just trying to share Twine. So you can see that, right?
Try opening the passage now.
Open the passage?
Or like you were, oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm wrong. I thought you
hadn't opened the passage. I was just talking.
See.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry
Threw you
about
a
that.
curve.
Continue.
Yeah. So anyway, so here's the either macro. This is the passage code. And here are the options laid in. We were talking in Anastasia's workshop about, I made a note, substitution grammars, which sounds so much better than Mad Libs, but so much of what we do is really that kind of template-based substitution. And the either macro in Harlowe was a very good way to do that. Okay, so I'm really just getting started here. When we moved to Chapbook, we seem to have lost that. And Chris may jump in here and go like, oh no, actually, it's been my impression that there's nothing like, and I asked him this question, there's nothing exactly like the either macro. He's smiling, so I probably have it wrong. But anyway, I've learned some things by trying to build the equivalent of the either macro, which I've got in this file here, which I could just show you, but it's a little more fun maybe if we build it. So I will actually go back out. Right, here's a version that's not quite complete. It's sort of half-baked. And I'll just walk you through the setup, and then we'll build it ourselves to have the fun of doing that. Chris pointed out there's a thing called a variables block, right? Which I live by this now. Practically every passage I build is going to have a variable block in it. So this is our variables block, and this is what I think of as Chapbook variables, right? And I don't know whether that's proper nomenclature or not, by which I mean it's not JavaScript. It's the kind of variable declaration and building that Chapbook wants. Now I'm building a variable of a certain type, which is called an array. And that's documented. So I know that's a term that the Chapbook knows and uses. An array is an ordered list in which the items have order numbers attached to them. So we can refer to the items in an array as, item 0, item 1, item 2. And that's what's going to happen here. This next instruction down here, which I've pre-written, identifies a variable called the adjective, and uses this instruction to make a selection from the array and plug it in there. In other words, it's a random selection from the array. Okay, and we're going to use the adjective right here. Now, this is not in the variables block. This is in, I was going to ask you, what do you call the other thing that isn't the variables block?
I'll just go with text.
I was going to call it the text area or something like that. So
there's no official name, but we'll go with text.
Well, we've just made one. In the book, we're going to call it the main text. So we're plugging that variable in here. So we're going to basically, come up with an adjective to follow Chapbook is. So Chapbook is swell. Oops, never type in down. Fine on its own. Just as good as Harlowe. Oops. Nifty. Okay. So we now have the array. We're making a selection from it. We're plugging it in here, and this is all just commentary I've written. It's not actually part of the demo, except for this bit, which is a reload link that will reload the current passage. And now I will try to run this. And if it doesn't work, I have a version I built earlier. It'll work. It'll work. There it is. So Chapbook is just as good as Harlowe. Chapbook is nifty. Chapbook is just as good. So that's the thing about the either macro from Harlowe, was that it did not have a preset order. So it was a random selection, and it had no barrier against repetition. And we've exactly duplicated that structure here. So we have duplicated the functionality, which is kind of neat on its own, but there's something I want to show you that is really kind of exciting. If you care about this stuff, which I do, have a look at this line. This is the selection line. And if you do substitution grammars in JavaScript, you're probably used to writing a line that's almost exactly like this. Let me break this line down into its component pieces. This is the name of the array, ADGS. Okay, there it is up there. And the square bracket indicates that we want one item from the array, and we're going to pass a number to indicate which item we want. What follows is the mathematics that produces that number. And it has two parts. I'll talk about the inner part first, okay? We're using a Chapbook function called random.fraction, which gives us back, I'm going to say a decimal. Nod, Chris? Yes.
Yep.
Right.
Between 0 and 1, obviously.
Between 0 and 1. And we're going to multiply that by the length of the array, which will return an integer value. It is going to return an integer value. I'll show you why in a second. An integer value between 0 and 1 less than the length of the array. Okay, which means that it's going to give us a number that will work to get something out of that array. Okay, we all do this in JavaScript. I do it all the time. Here's what I consider the sweet bit. Math.floor. That's not Chapbook. That's JavaScript, right? And I mean, the reason that I'm overproud and invested in this is that I kind of figured this out on my own. It wasn't documented in the Chapbook documentation, at least initially. I just tried it out. Just sort of went like, I need this. Wonder if it'll work. The interesting thing about it is, and that's why I say Chapbook to JavaScript is as English to Latin. JavaScript is the larger, older language in which Chapbook in effect functions, or kind of from which it derives. And we can slip back to the older tongue when we need to. That's, I mean, Chris, I'm going to embarrass you. I mean, this is genius. And this is a wonderful thing you've built. This ability to build a superstructure, but also be able to drop back. It's like being able to use Latin phrases in English when, they do something that we can't do otherwise. In the process of building this demo, I discovered that you can also do all this as JavaScript. Right? You can build your array and grab from it in JavaScript, and you can actually use the Chapbook expression in the JavaScript, and that also works. So cool. Anyway, let's see, where am I? Yeah, I got a couple minutes. So we can rebuild that element of variation, that really beautiful thing called an either. But I wanted to show you something else because once you get started, kind of mixing JavaScript together with Chapbook, all kinds of things are possible. So let's see. Yeah, this is a more ambitious attempt, and again, this is half build. So what I should talk about here is this setup. This is the JavaScript modifier. And what that allows us to do is to declare that what follows is JavaScript code. And we can write JavaScript code straight into a Chapbook page. Another thing I really, really, really like about Chapbook. In effect, the end of the modifier, this is actually another modifier. but modifiers work until they encounter another modifier, and there's a special modifier called continue that allows you to terminate, a previous modifier. So in effect, this is a JavaScript scripting body. It's like a script container on a web page, only we don't say /script, we say continue at the bottom. What are we doing here? Well, we're doing another substitution grammar, right? I'm going to have some people names, and I'm going to have some things they desire. And then some other things are going to happen that I'll talk about in a second. Let's just do some names of people. I have some code here somewhere. Yeah, there we go. Norman Mailer. He's always around.
I love that was the first thing you thought of, was the ghost of Norman Mailer as people.
Pretty much the first thing that came in mind. Lady Flange is a recurring character for me. Microdog is a superhero. Let's see. I want to go into too much typing. Shirley's important. Oh yes, and that character is important. Okay, and there are things they can want. Let's see. That's why Shirley's important. Let's see. Almost done. Oops, I felt something up. Yes, okay. Right. Ways you can go wrong. Oh, no, I can't do it. Sorry. Probably a bad idea to throw a comma into a comma-separated list. Though actually, there is a way you can do it. That works. Okay, and I think that's all we have to do in order to run this. I think I'll run it, and then I'll come back and talk about the code, and then that's all from me. So let's see if it'll run. Always nice when you don't see the pink screen of pain. So that's what that does. It's a substitution grammar that just generates some sentences that replace one another. And it'll go on. Oh, see, I didn't capitalize the ghost. It has a kind of stupid charm, as substitution grammars tend to do. Let me talk about the rest of the code here while I fix this. So this is an array. This is also an array. I make the selections from the array, from each array here in these two variables. And again, this is JavaScript, so I'm not using colons, I'm using the equals, because that's the syntax convention in JavaScript. That can throw you off. I've had a couple of times when I've forgotten which idiom I'm in. I'm using math.floor on math.random, which is how you get a random integer in JavaScript. Again, as I said, I forgot and went random.fraction in an earlier version, and it worked. I won't try that now. And then to get it to appear on the page, I'm using, again, if you're a web coder, you'll be really familiar with this, document.getElement by ID on a span, right? Which is, so it's going to go in as an inline element into a sentence. But here's my span down here outside the code block. Span ID equals peep span, right? And there's a want span. And then all I have to do is set up the animation, which is done with a set interval, calling this custom method or function called changeup on a two. And sorry, things are showing up on my screen. And that's really all there is to this thing. Now you may be saying to yourself, because it occurred to me as I was finishing the demo, nice, but that's all JavaScript, and you could do that on a web page. So why are you doing it in Twine? And I have two answers. One is that with Twine, I have that beautiful visual structure editor. So the problem with web pages is that you're building it blind, right? You're building your structure without knowing what links to what necessarily, right? But I've got that structure editor with Twine, with Chapbook that I can go back to. And then the other justification I'll show you is, let's see, should have a 5B here somewhere, 5A. I can build all the JavaScript, but also have Chapbook elements, also have Twine elements. The element I'm using here is a cycling link, right? So I won't bother showing you the code here, but this is a standard standard Chapbook feature right here. And then this is what all that JavaScript stuff is doing. I can mix the two together, right? And I can mix them seamlessly. I can mix them without a lot of fuss and problem. And so far it hasn't broken. So, so the thrust of what I'm trying to do, and I am wrapping up, is show you how you can move beyond, how you can make your screen flash, how you can move beyond a kind of static, turn-by-turn, stable environment into things that are a little more dynamic by mixing in some JavaScript. And as I said, that's going to be all from me.
Cool. I believe, Stuart, you gave me the example, like the code that you demoed just now. I think you gave me, there's a link for that that code,
Yes,
so that people can play around with it also on that.
I will type it into chat if anybody can see it.
Yeah, I think Dan will get that to folks.
Okay.
Yeah, and that'll be linked. I think I called it source code for Stuart section.
Yes, thanks.
Cool.
Yeah.
So Dan, I guess now is the time for Q&A. So I guess however you'd like to do it, let us know.
Dan is muted. While we're waiting.
Can y'all hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if people have questions on Twitch, now that I'm actually, my voice can be heard there too, please type them. I will relay them to Chris and Stuart.
Cool. You were going to ask a question, Stuart.
Yeah, I was. So another Harlowe macro that I've been fond of is goto, where you can, force a transition, instigate a transition from one passage to another. Is there anything like that possible in Chapbook?
So that's refresh my memory. I feel terrible for asking this. I believe that jumps you immediately, right? Like you don't get a choice. So yeah. There's an insert called embed passage, which is probably the closest example. I know it works it's not quite the same because you sort of like the word or the name indicates you're sort of gluing one passage inside of another one. It's not forcing a navigation, so it doesn't show up in the same sort of way, but the effect is more or less the same.
You can bring the content of another passage into your current passage.
Exactly, yeah.
I suppose if you wanted to fake it up, you could maybe try changing that name, the room name with config.
Yes, and that room stuff I was showing was particular to the Cloak of Darkness example. It's something you can obviously borrow for your own stories, but you could do fancy stuff like maybe you're writing an RPG or something like that. You can display like hit points and whatnot, and in those kinds of passages. So,
okay, Dan has a question.
Yep, the questions are coming in on the chat on Zoom.
Okay.
So first question looks like, how does Twine pick or change the default story format? That is, if you click on formats on the main Twine story list, in that first tab, there's like a radio button on the left side, and whatever you choose there, that becomes the default. And second thing, for the snapshots, do they update or do you need manually and delete and create new as you adjust state? So in that case, like if you want to change what a snapshot does, what you would do is just give it the same name as, like hit add, or go to add a new snapshot. You just give it the name of an existing one and says, "Are you sure you want to replace it?" If so, then it would sort of update. Oh my goodness, so many questions. Stuart, you're on mute right now.
Thank you. Somebody's been embedding images and audio as base 64 in passages. Is this still a viable? Will this lightning do strike?
Yeah, so base 64, just if folks aren't familiar with what that's about, the idea is instead of using a separate file, you can use what's called base 64 encoding. It's basically a way to convert an image file or a sound or something like that into plain text that a web browser can understand. And so if you go down that particular road, you could use like a regular HTML tag. The other thing that I think Stuart's demo kind of showed is that not only can you mix JavaScript with Chapbook code, you can also mix and match HTML. Chapbook uses Markdown for its formatting. So, and Markdown lets you type in HTML to your heart's content, and it'll just sort of plug it in. So you could write an image tag with, you know, like data colon, I forget the base 64 syntax off the top of my head, but what you're continuing to do would still work, I believe. At the outset, you said Chapbook was designed partially to be welcoming to non-programmers. Do you think I accomplished that goal? Yes. No. And how are you evaluating whether or not you're meeting that goal? And so, yes, absolutely. So so if you look at the Chapbook code repository, I have a file labeled, I think, design goals. And one of them is absolutely to be as beginner friendly as I can be, or it can be for folks. And some of that, to be honest, has been sort of not exactly an impediment, but has added difficulty to it. So for example, like what Stuart was showing, the math.floor function. Right now, if you read the documentation for Chapbook, it never talks about a function at all. And so and it's not to say that functions will never happen in Chapbook or anything like that. It's more that I've been sort of struggling, so far anyway, to really introduce, I mean, not that a function is a particularly complicated concept, but then you have to talk about arguments and chaining functions together and things that Stuart demoed, right?
And I'll just sorry, Chris. I'll just say, you know, what I love about Chapbook is that if you want that stuff, you put it in a JavaScript modifier, and if you don't want to deal with it, you don't deal with it.
True. So I just think about like how, because I wrote the documentation for Chapbook with the mindset that the person reading it has never programmed a thing in their life, doesn't even 100% know what programming means. And so like it's designed to be super gentle. It's designed to be something that you could give hopefully to a student or someone who's always wanted to build a computer thing, a game, a story, interactive, whatever. And then they could start at the beginning, and by the end of it, hopefully get a pretty good idea of how to do that. And I'll be honest, I don't know, I wonder if Graham Nelson is listening right now. It was modeled really heavily. Like I can't say that I stole, but I tried, it was really hard to model it after the approach that the Informed Designer's manual that took, where it started very, very gentle and kind of scaled upwards. Those of you who have read the designer's manual may remember that the exercises at the end of every section were rather brutal at times, but nevertheless, the overall frame of the book was really, really good. And I tried to kind of model after that kind of approach. So anyway, I'm drifting a little bit off the topic.
Shoulders of giants. There are two questions we ought to get to.
Oh, sure.
One is Chapbook still under development? Will we need to update Chapbook as changes are made?
Yes, is the short answer. Yes. I announced those things. Probably the easiest. Well, I guess the ad version of this is you should follow my Patreon, and I announce updates there. But I also do devlog stuff, right? But the non-ad version or non-ad answer is I also post these updates on Twitter and things like that. And so that's one way to find out about changes and new versions. So those happen sporadically because it's something that I work on kind of in spare time and so forth. So there's not like a regular release schedule necessarily. but it is something I definitely have like future plans and stuff like that for that.
There's another question too about Chapbook as default, and you have answered that to me, but you should answer it for the public.
Yeah. So yeah, the first question was actually asking like, well, when, if ever, would Chapbook become the default for Twine? I don't see that happening in the near future. And I think that's because although like Stuart showed, you can reproduce a lot of the functionality of Harlowe, for example, inside of Chapbook. There's dedicated communities behind it. There are people who like used Harlowe and love it. And in my opinion, Harlowe is actually pretty good. If it ever, like to me, the only thing that would really trigger me reconsidering it would be that if Leon Arnott, who's the main person behind Harlowe, decided no longer that he was able to maintain it or something along those lines, then maybe let's have that conversation. But even then, it's not a, to me, it's not a given that like Chapbook would sweep in and become the default. Like I think that's would be a tricky conversation to have in general. It's something because I think in general, it's a community-ish kind of decision. It's not really necessarily my place to say like, yep, I believe Chapbook is the absolute best thing to learn as a beginner. That seems rather self-serving, honestly. And so like, I wouldn't trust myself to make that decision if I were just some person in the crowd.
Yeah. There's a question, is there a way to make the after feature play nice with forks?
Okay. So talking about those two things. So another common task that we didn't show today is that people love putting delays into Twine stories. So you want to, like some text appears and then a second later or something like that. Then some more text appears. And so that's what this after modifier does. Basically, you type in square brackets after 1 second, then the text underneath of it will appear, or after 0.5 seconds, or after 10 years. You can even type in stuff like that. And just FYI, like I tried to do it, and I think this is something that's a little bit different, excuse me, that about Chapbook than I don't know that Harlowe or SugarCube offers this functionality, is that I find allegedly, I think I'm a relatively fast reader. And when people put in delays and stuff, it drives me up the wall, mostly, because I'm usually like, okay, I've read this thing 3 times. Can we please move forward? Which I realize may not, in fact, be what the experience that an author may intend. At any rate, in Chapbook, players always have the option, if they click, to see that, to move forward. And also there's additional feedback. That's the other thing that I've noticed, is that it can be a little bit confusing sometimes with delayed text, where you're like, wait a minute, did I hit a dead end and like the story is broken? So Chapbook will automatically show a little watch icon down at the bottom that shows like, yep, in fact, there is something coming. The game is still working. And so the question was about forks and how that plays with it. And I'm going to guess there's some kind of display bug involved that I am not personally aware of. So I would ask the person who asked that question, if you wouldn't mind opening like a bug in the Chapbook repo and we can take a look, because I don't know. I don't know all the details, to be honest, about what might be going wrong and stuff like that. And the other question, I guess, was, can I make text fade out? Like, i.e., like after a certain amount of time, then this text goes away. I think the answer is no, but that is a really interesting feature, and we should probably explore adding that.
I can't get you fade out, but I can get you disappear if you switch to JavaScript and you just do a JavaScript timed effect with like a set timeout or a set interval on a DOM element or an HTML element, like something with an ID.
Mm-hmm.
And this would let you, for example, replace a sentence or a phrase with an outlink after, 60 seconds or something. So, I mean, it's kind of like what I think this person is describing.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, like it's one of those things that I try not to say too much, because I think I say it too much already. That obviously, like what Stuart's showing, like if you can do it in a web page, you can do it in Chapbook. It's just a matter of convenience and so forth. So I think it would be great to have some kind of thing that was like a little more prepackaged, where you don't have to know JavaScript and things like that.
Differences between Chapbook and SugarCube, similarities and differences.
Cool. All right. So the two things I think that people will notice immediately if you're used to SugarCube is that, like we were showing today, you got to pull all your variable changes up to the top of a passage. You can't mix them in with the rest of your text. That's something that people are used to, I think, and one way or the other. And that's just like a design decision. The second thing that I think will stick out to people is that you can't nest conditionals inside of Chapbook. And that tends to make people very upset when I tell them about that. And so there's a whole section on the guide that talks about that. Because obviously that's something that people like it's not something that they want to do necessarily. They just, they find that they need to do it. And there are a couple different approaches to it. The easy, and before I talk about the workarounds, I'll talk about why I decided this, is that what I found in working with, because I teach interactive fiction too, and I've taught SugarCube in a couple classes. And what I found looking at student work was that it could be very difficult to sort of untangle the logic of a particular passage. And then you can accidentally leave off too many end ifs or write an else in the wrong place. And these bugs can be really annoying and tricky to track down. And it's just a little bit opaque. And so that was sort of like a line I personally drew in the sand, that's to say, like, okay, don't nest in conditionals. And here are a couple of workarounds. You can use temporary variables to do it, is the usual route that I suggest to people, to say, like, look, say, like, because usually you're doing alternatives in some way. Use variables, like, it's okay, you can make a variable that you don't really care about after this particular passage. And at least so far, like, I think it's an open conversation, but so far I haven't seen a use case where I'm like, oh man, nope, you're right, we got to use a nested conditional here. But that's not to say that I'm absolutely right here either. So, other questions? I think we might have scrolled past one by accident.
Did we?
Let's see. Maybe I'm wrong. Oh, maybe I think we covered everybody except for this most recent one. Can you do a time effect and keep changing the color to lighter shades, like a kind of a fake fade out? I think the answer again would be using JavaScript for that sort of thing. I think that, so the first thought that I go to with all this stuff is accessibility, right? In terms of the sense of, like, well, if someone's using a screen reader or something like that, what experience should they have? And obviously it should be equivalent to someone who isn't using a screen reader. And so I feel like that's the potentially limiting factor, is like, do we just pretend as if that text goes away or something like that? What does it mean to become lighter or something like that? So that, I think it's doable again, but I know for sure you'd have to kind of start digging in JavaScript to make it happen.
And I was building a project for the book, and using a dumb 1.5 second timer to force transitions, as a kind of a show-off thing, and in the process sort of had this come to whoever moment where I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's really unfair on people who don't read as fast as I do. I'm not even sure I read that fast. The usability question needs to be forced, and you need to say, okay, no, maybe I shouldn't do that sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, there's a lot of there. And the other question that popped up in the chat looks like other features, design decisions informed by teaching experience. Like, I think this is not directly speaking, but something I try really hard to stress to my students is accessibility, because it is something that on the web in general, unfortunately, people do a generally terrible job at, and it has real implications for people's lives on websites. And obviously it's real tough to say to someone, I'm sorry, you can't read or you can't experience my story because you happen not to be able to see particularly well. Like, that's horrible, right? So that sort of is, to me, one of the through lines in this stuff, is that when I think about new features and so forth, I try as best as I can. I'm obviously not perfect and probably have made mistakes already, to think about, well, how do we make this as accessible as possible? I think in general, like what has surprised me, I think, Well, the other thing that comes to mind is that immediately, I guess I'm curious, maybe Stuart, if you can talk about this too in your own teaching experience, is that I taught a semester-long course in interactive fiction, which was great, a lot of fun, but immediately, like in week 2, it was like once a week class. In week 2, they're already like, I hate this font, I want to make it a different font. And I'm like, cool. We can definitely talk about that, but that's probably not the most interesting, like in terms of the decisions to make when you're working with Twine. Maybe what font to choose is hopefully not the most significant one, right? And so like
Yeah.
thinking about appearance and stuff like that, I notice that with students oftentimes, not all students, of course, but some of them.
Well, you have been teaching in an art school with a design program.
True.
That can happen. I just got a question about the book I just alluded to. This is Twining, which Dan actually mentioned. It's not out yet. Anastasia Salter. Anastasia is first author. I'm second author. And we are finishing the final revision now. We're going to get it to the publisher in 2 weeks. And I don't actually know what the production schedule is.
Stuart, can you talk a little bit about what the book is going to be, what it's going to cover?
Yeah, it's the subtitle, I think, is Critical and Creative Approaches to the Twine Platform. So we alternate chapters. We do, okay, maybe that'll help. So yeah, we do these cultural chapters, and then every other chapter is a practical, where we dive in and cover sort of the things we were demoing, some of the things. So there's an early chapter that walks you, and we standardize on Chapbook almost. We make a couple of excursions out. There's one exercise in SugarCube. There are a couple in 3 in Harlowe, but mainly Chapbook. And we're really just trying to explore it's the creative possibilities of the platform.
It's very mysterious.
Yeah, I'll keep it mysterious.
More shall be revealed, I guess, when the book is published.
Yeah.
Questions about accessibility resources. My go-tos are the Mozilla Developer Network in general. Like I know that they're not exactly like the authority on accessibility. Like if you were looking for kind of like the foundational kind of thing with it, then I would start with like webaim.org, for example. Obviously, WCAG, WCAG is kind of the source on this stuff, but they tend to write in very like high-level specification kind of ways that can be a little bit hard to pick up if you're a novice at this stuff. But I find that in general, like the Mozilla Developer Network, not just for accessibility, but for web dev stuff in general, is a really good starting point. They have a lot of resources. They don't just talk about like, well, how does it work in Firefox? They talk about browser compatibility and browser issues, like for Chrome and Safari and so forth. And sort of.
Sorry, I'm sorry, you weren't done yet.
Oh, I was going to jump on to the next question, but you go ahead.
Well, I know, and I wanted to jump in front of you and just say before he answers, I think he's done a brilliant job with Chapbook. I think that it really is a gorgeous thing to look at. I love that choice of Iowan as a font. I'm a book person, but it's really good for book people. So.
Yeah. So the question was, how do you balance visual aesthetics with technical aspects? How heavily do you, I assume you being like me, weigh visual aesthetics when creating Chapbook? So I'll tell a funny story, or maybe funny, hopefully humorous. So when I first created Twine, like way back in '09 or whatever, before SugarCube and Harlowe even existed, like I had 2 basic formats, Jonah and Sugarcane. One, they worked very, very similarly. They just looked different. At any rate, and when I was designing those from the beginning, I was like, oh, I'll make these really kind of aggressively kind of dull looking. And that'll encourage people to customize and build, use their own kind of look and feel on top of this. And what I soon discovered was like, well, no, actually, it sort of evolved into its own aesthetic, which was really cool in a funny way, like kind of like a punk rock kind of way. But also, it's just true that like that was the thing that I had to sort of relearn that, like, because I work as a web developer myself, like there's just so much of stuff that I, to a certain degree, take for granted. Like, oh yeah, CSS, kind of no big deal. Like there's a lot of weird little nooks and crannies to it, but it's not that complicated. But in fact, it's not so easy, especially if you've never really dabbled in web development. And that's not really a thing that, like, that's not like me trying to say anything bad about CSS. It's just the nature of the beast is that over the years it accumulated a lot of different things, and it's fairly complex. So anyway, I try, like, my goal with Chapbook in general was to basically say, I'm going to give you as nice looking as a default as I can. And, you know, if you don't want to go any further than that, at least it'll look relatively neutral. Another sort of weird sort of source of inspiration for me was back in the day, maybe folks remember Blogspot or blogger.com. Still around, I realize, but I remember an article I read about from the designer's standpoint where they were talking about the templates they had designed for it, and they said, well, we want it to be neutral but not unattractive, which is incredibly difficult, as it turns out. Like, it's sort of like designing the font Helvetica. You need it to be graceful but also not particularly, it doesn't stand out on the page, right? And so that was sort of where I was trying to shoot for on that. I feel fairly happy with it right now in terms of what it looks like. That's not to say that it'll be that way forever.
When you had your Adventure Time moment.
I definitely don't have a video clip of that particular segment saved on my computer forever. And so,
liar.
The question is, how do I feel like when Twine hit pop culture insofar as it has? Startled, I think, is the word for it. Like, it's a little shocking when this thing that I started basically as a tiny little open source project apparently hits this critical mass. That is not something that I ever really expect. Nobody hopefully expects that. So I don't know what to say other than it was one of those things like, holy cow, like this is something. I guess the thing that I'll say is that as you get older, you start to and I'm not that old, but as you start to get older, you start to think about a little bit about, like, well, how will folks remember me, or what will I be remembered for, if anything, which is a pretty kind of dark, dark tea time of the soul kind of moment. And it was like, okay, well, if I am remembered, which is not a guarantee, it will probably be for Twine, and that's kind of, it's nice, is the short answer. It is sort of weirdly comforting in that way.
As someone who has experienced old age, the even sweeter thing is when nobody remembers what you were remembered for, but they're going to remember the thing that came next, which is really, it's delightful.
Cool. Dan, maybe we're hitting the end of questions. Is that fair to say?
Dan's still muted. Dan.
Okay, cool.
Oh, we've got another question.
All right, so let's move on.
No, we don't.
We're good.
We're good.
I'm going to reshare real quick, and I'll narrate, and Stuart, feel free to jump in.
Sure.
Okay, let's jump back over to here. So we are going to, after this stream kind of wraps up, Stuart and I are going to jump onto Discord so you can chat with us further. And so what we wanted to leave you with were those suggestions, some things to try out yourself. And so I came up with one idea and Stuart came up with two. My idea was, so often we think of Twine as being primarily text-based. And well, try writing a story that is primarily image-based and see, like try using Unsplash, try looking, I linked the Creative Commons search, try using images as the starting point for a story and try that out.
And then I think I had put up an open challenge, build something that's got some mechanism of text variation in it, some kind of substitution grammar. So it could be a cycling link out of Chapbook. It could, if you can grab the code that I built or make sense of it, you could try to duplicate the I want to call it one of the either macro. But the challenge here is to make that work for narrative purposes. So, get a story out of it somehow.
Cool. And do you want to talk about the second example too?
I don't remember what the second one was.
Oh, can you see my screen? Or I'll read it to you.
Yeah, read it to me.
Build a story in which random or programmed variation in one passage determines the links that you can follow out of it.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, dependency, which might presume. So we didn't really demo this. That I think I wrote that when I was planning to demo something else. We never really talked about that way that you can, create conditions in the variable declaration. Chris showed it real fast. If you want help with that, ask us on the Discord.
That is an excellent transition, I think, because I think we're going to wrap up.
Yep.
And so, A, thank you for watching. And secondly, we're going to transition over to the Discord channel and chat further. And so just as a recap, we're going to be on the question and answer channel specifically on Discord.